Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Oh, happy day, ladies and gentlemen.
When Jesus washed.
He did wash my sins away, but it's also a happy day because today happens to be, you guys know I kind of am one of the, kind of like Jess loves her Hallmark movies. I love my days of the year and
You do.
special holidays that everybody just leaves going unnoticed. And today,
Uncelebrated.
Who's making these days up, though? That's what I want to know.
there's
might
a
be
lot of different,
Alex.
like sometimes it's
Is it
like,
Hallmark, or is it a big greeting card?
Sometimes it's like food companies. Sometimes it's organizations like trying to create an awareness for things. The three that I'm going to ask you about, I don't know who the original founders are because I want to see which one you're most excited about celebrating.
Pet a Raccoon Day.
It is not. These all have to do with food. Okay, so which of these are you most likely to celebrate this evening? Friday, the 20th of September.
Okay.
National Queso Day.
Oh.
National Queso Day. National Fried Rice Day.
Okay.
And then lastly, National String Cheese Day.
They're all the same day?
Yes, all of them are September the 20th, all today. And which are you most excited to celebrate? I'll just say it right now. What I would like to celebrate right now is National Fried Rice Day.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not talking about just the nasty generic fried rice. I'm talking about like it was just made for you at Kobe or Genji. I'll say either of them. Okay. No sponsorships here. But that fried rice, that is just...
You're saying hibachi fried rice.
Yeah,
is what
hibachi
you
fried
want.
rice.
Yeah, okay.
Right now,
Egg fried rice, yeah.
that I'm all about celebrating.
That stuff is
right
really good. I make fried rice at home a lot, but you have to, the trick to that is having like day old rice. You got to have rice that...
It's got a little crunch to it.
Yeah, a little leftover, so it's less hydrated, so you can reconstitute it with your
Wow.
wok or whatever.
You throw some
Eric, you
queso
sound
on
like you
that,
know
that
what
could
you're
be
doing.
good, though.
Some what?
If I threw some queso on there just to splurge on the double day, and I would even shred some. I've been to the point where I've shred string cheese before because we were out of cheese. Like you take the anyway.
That's like a life hack. Did it work?
It was difficult, but it worked. Anyway, that's
Also,
my
couldn't you
answer.
like string it instead of shredding it? Like,
yeah, but it was going on like little mini pizzas, and I don't know. It just felt like it was gonna cook better that way.
I don't know which. I mean, I will probably more than likely celebrate String Cheese Day. I probably have string cheese more days than I don't because we usually buy it from Sam's Club, and it's always in the fridge. And like whenever it's like I just got home,
You got a
I'm
hankering
starving,
for-
I'm gonna eat something quick. It's a string cheese. I'll just pull it out of the fridge and grab it. That's not like. I mean, I would probably rather celebrate fried rice or queso day, but String Cheese Day will almost be a guaranteed celebration that will occur.
Are you a brand loyalist for string cheese? Like, to me, it is not all made.
Yeah,
it is not all made.
I am,
equal.
and I know the brand because I get it.
Sargento.
Nope.
It's like the green
Cheese head-
and-
the cheese
The guy with the guy, it's like he's got like a superhero cheese. He's
Yeah.
like,
I know.
Yep.
which one is
It's
it?
green.
Yeah. I'm Googling. It's
Just
fine.
give us your answer while,
give it-
while he looks
I'm
up.
just gonna say that I feel like this is a hard debate if we really get into the weeds because it's a very like all three are like very consumable foods.
Yeah.
I like myself some white queso
Okay.
too.
Like
I think it's good.
Queso
Oh yeah.
Blanco. Do you like are you saying just from any Mexican restaurant, like kind of that one that's typically on their menu?
That's usually what I would go for. I do feel like string cheese would be the overall chosen one in my house, but my kids are very particular. Like if it has to be a cold, like what's the like if it's piping hot, what is a very like a crispy
Freezing cold?
Yeah. Pieces. If it is like anyway getting to room temperature.
Well, you should
passing on
probably
that string
leave the
cheese.
cheese in the fridge. So.
I do, but like if
Okay.
it's like out and I'm like, hey,
Oh,
I brought this for you from home, like school pickups.
Oh, they
Too
want you
warm.
to like have a cooler.
Yep.
I mean, isn't it very European to just leave cheese out on the counter? Like that's kind of like
Maybe like people
normal.
leave those big cheese wheels out.
Yeah, it's normal. It's
All right.
Frigo.
Yeah.
Frigo. That's the one. That's the one I go to. It's the best, I think, personally.
I agree.
Okay,
And
Alex,
they're doing
agree.
well because they have the contract at Sam's and Costco. Mm-hmm. So
People know it's the
Hey.
best one.
It's the one you look for.
Yeah, that's what. There we go. We answered that. Let us know in the comments wherever you're watching this, or which one you're celebrating today. We'd love to hear that. I would, anyways.
I would too.
I would enjoy it. Yeah.
Like, rate the queso. I mean, some people are like really fanatics about Qdoba queso versus Chipotle queso, or now you got like just your traditional Mexican restaurant queso. There's a lot of choices.
Yeah.
The Twitch streamer that my son loves is queso, but it's spelled CASE_OH queso. But
Throw him in there too.
Give us
though.
your queso for the queso.
yeah.
That was bad.
You are such a dad nowadays.
Okay.
Good.
All right. Well, today we're going to be talking about America's obsession with true crime and all those fun documentaries that we like to watch. So stay tuned for that. I feel like the lights should be dimmer in here because we're talking about true crime. This is it's a little too bright in here for me, and I feel like we have to talk in a very dramatic way.
That does make
Eric,
sense.
that was so good.
Oh, thank you. I have never watched true crime or listened to true crime podcasts. I'm
Lying
very
right now.
opposed to it. I think it's evil and wrong. Roll the credits into podcast. We did it. Bad. Don't listen. No, we're going to talk about it. We're going to open this can of worms.
Let's do it.
People are very obsessive with it. I think it's a very popular form of entertainment. It's all over all the streaming platforms. I would argue people who might even say they don't like true crime still tune into the news every night, which is pretty much true crime. I think the old saying in the news industry is if it bleeds, it leads. And that's still true to today. I don't think that's changed.
Yeah.
You know,
I've never heard that.
Yeah, violence is something that's always kind of the top of the hour when the newscast starts. But yeah, we're going to kind of unpack that a little bit today and kind of just explore that. See, even obviously from a Christian perspective, what should we kind of take into our minds, and how should we process that, and how can it be beneficial in some ways, and then where is it harmful, and maybe consider the victims in this too, and how it affects them and the families. So there we go. Any thoughts from anybody? Any opening thoughts?
It does seem there has been a resurgence isn't the right word, but and just so much more ability with social media platforms, with all these streaming platforms, to kind of create and tell a lot more of these stories. Like I mean, I remember growing up, and I don't know, cops, bad boys, what you gonna do? America's Most Wanted.
Yeah.
Like
Unsolved Mysteries.
Rescue 911.
Oh yeah.
there were
Shatner.
these probably each network had their own kind of version of it, and still 2020 I would say kind of leans into sometimes the unsolved mystery stuff and Dateline, but it does seem like in a Netflix era where you've got like Tiger Kings that have been on there, or Making a Murderer, or I just watched one on a guy named Alex Murdaugh.
Oh yeah.
And
I
I think that was on Netflix. And so it seems like more and more they're popping up and becoming more and more popular, and probably turning into fall time of year, getting more in the eerie Halloween-ish time. There's just a lot more accessibility than there ever has been. Not even to mention there's like entire channels on TikTok and Instagram channels really dedicated to telling these stories that don't quite maybe make it on a TV platform, but they've got millions of followers, getting millions of views, and essentially self-funding these types of things. So
or even like
it's crazy.
Reddit too. I think
Yeah.
Reddit, a lot of just amateur sleuths out there trying to solve crimes, and I mean sometimes that can be really hurtful too, like to the investigation, or it can pin things on innocent people, and it can get pretty messy.
And it spreads really quickly, especially online, where you've got kind of amateur people that aren't in a society that you're legally innocent until proven guilty. It seems like with an online kind of audience, you can be very much guilty until proven innocent in a lot of these kind of spaces. I remember we were even talking about maybe this spring, I don't remember the name, there's a pastor in, I think, North Carolina, if you guys remember right.
Yeah, why can't I remember his name?
And his wife ended up dying by suicide, but...
Supposedly.
Yeah, but there was like, just even in that week of like the guy that was like the investigator, not even like online investigator telling that story. Like I remember my emotions going from, no, he did it. No, he didn't do it. No, you're like taking you on this full journey as more evidence unravels, but before our eyes, instead of like collecting it and putting it all in like for a jury, it's kind of all playing out in real time. And so even that, we're just in a different space.
I think that that's how most things are going to play out going forward, is because we have social media, because there is this widespread network of people that do care about true crime or things happening in their communities or things that are getting national news, or maybe that are cold cases. Like these are things that I don't see that changing. Like I think people are going to stay involved, and it's for a lot of people, like I think about like even things that have happened in Omaha over the past couple years of just like Ryan Larson, the little boy that left his elementary school, and he's to this day never been found. And there are still people that are going out and doing searches and asking questions about that. And those are kind of the people that don't let stories die and keep them relevant.
Yeah.
And so I think that that is something that's really helpful. I even think about, I don't know if it's necessarily at this point considered a cold case, but what's the other? Goodrich that is missing. Tyler Goodrich, the one from Lincoln that's been missing since last year. Like he just disappeared. And so those are things too where law enforcement and people in charge are asking for people's help, and they're asking for people to keep their eyes open. And so I think that it creates this maybe not an official relationship, but it feels like a relationship between me and my computer looking at, let me look at Google image searches and like, let me look at that kind of stuff, because it creates this ability, like, can I be helpful? And there are cases that have been solved like that. So
yeah, I think even Nextdoor and like the Ring doorbell app and stuff like that, I'll see someone post on there, hey, do you know who this guy is? He stole the stuff off my patio, or it's just, and you kind of, why do you get invested in it? Maybe it is from a place of wanting to help, or it's also just like, I think curiosity killed the cat, and it's that's something that people are just curious and want to, maybe it's probably personality too. I think there's a lot to be said about that, because I know a lot of people too who just wouldn't want to engage in that, wouldn't want to entertain these stories, don't want to hear about it, can't handle it. And I don't mean to say that like judgmentally, like, oh, you can't handle it, you're a wimp or something. It's just that they don't want to fill their head with that. But I do think there's something just innately human about being curious and wanting to explore those things, and whether that's because of fear or because it helps us maybe process, well, what would I do in that situation, or how would I react if that was someone close to me, or if that happened to me, or that sort of thing. But
yep, I think it's all of the above. And if we're disclosing, I am a true crime fan. If it's on Netflix or HBO, or there's a true crime documentary, I've probably watched it.
Yeah.
I enjoy court TV. I really enjoy that kind of stuff. Podcasts. Yeah. I consume a lot of that. That's not like everything, but like, you have to balance out the Valentine hallmarks with.
Yeah.
And while we're making confessions, the genesis of this episode was we don't know who they are, their initials, they just signed it BWH, that they're worried that one day they may not wake up because they see their spouse watch so many true crime television shows, and so they're wondering, oh man,
you killed her. We're gonna have our own true crime.
Okay, now everybody knows who that person's related to.
Okay, well, that's how they signed the email, so I don't want to. You kind of maybe gave it away there in your.
I'm not guilty at all.
Okay. not guilty. But one of the things that really got me thinking about this more lately than I probably have is a book that's totally unrelated to true crime. And Eric, you and I were talking about this a little bit. There's a book called Anxious Generation that really isn't focusing on this, but one of the chapters, the author talks about just the beginning of a lot of, true crime stuff and a fear-based childhood where a lot of parents would, it was the genesis of a lot of these, unsolved mysteries and all of these things where it seemed like
24/7 news cycles and things
where
like
it
that.
seemed like, everybody in a van was out to get your kid. They were missing people were on milk boxes all the time. There was just like this late 80s, early 90s, really, I think, push towards creating an awareness about all the danger out there. And what it did for a lot of the people growing up in that were just scared of it. They became fearful of everything. And so then we began parenting with this really big fear of abduction and what's going to happen to my kids and stay away. There's murderers everywhere. And there were, in the late 80s and 70s, some serial killers. That really were targeting, young women, and, you've got a few of those that were happening. And so there became this kind of cultural awareness that led towards maybe an overprotection, it seems like. And he breaks down, the solidarity for adults and community and some of these things inside of that book. So it really got me thinking about, okay, how healthy is this? And what, if we have some of the data for how those things are shaping our generation, how does putting this on steroids in some ways, how's that going to shape, the next generation for this awareness and fear and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, because I think in that book, too, he kind of points out how that's like children had more autonomy to go outside and play unattended, like to just go explore their world or walk down to a park close by. And now we live in a society where if someone sees an unattended child out in public, they probably call the cops. And so we don't really think about that much just because, over time, it's just the way culture has changed and where we're at. But yeah, that is kind of sad to me to think about that, really, if it's something where we've just entertained so many, because it's kind of like social media, right? One thing could happen and it feels like a really big thing because there's so many voices talking about that one incident. And then we start to believe, well, this must be happening everywhere. And it's like, well, no, it's probably not. Even I think in planning this episode, Jess, you had mentioned like the sex offenders list that now everybody has access to. Not saying that's a bad thing, right? But it still is a thing that kind of can just create a narrative that maybe it wasn't meant to create. It's like a tool that can be used to keep you safe in your neighborhood and be aware of those things. But also it kind of writes this narrative that, hey, there are evil, bad people out there trying to get my kids around every corner.
I think also we are living in a time where we have our grandparents' generation that we hear stories about them traveling across states by themselves at 10, 11, 12 years old, like going to visit.
Even.
Right.
Yeah.
And we have the pendulum swinging all the way to the other side where we have all this experience and we're hearing these stories about all this freedom that was there.
Yeah.
And now we have all this other knowledge of crimes and things that have happened. And now we're parenting this way. And that gap is so wide. I mean, that's going to create some kind of, like, I think a psychological awareness of, okay, the world used to be like this and it is so far the other way.
Yeah.
How am I protecting? And now I have knowledge of it and I can easily look at my phone or my computer and find out current things happening. And then I can research, all the things that have happened up to now. And I think that we're in a generation that those people are still living, talking about the freedom they have. And then we're parenting so differently. And I just feel like it's always like a brought up awareness of, even in storytelling, like around the dinner table.
Yeah. Yeah. I do wonder too, like if we, I think this is to the author's point in this book, like, have we kind of done this generation of children kind of an injustice by not letting them develop that way and explore and kind of learn on their own that, like, hey, here's how you interact with the world versus, always having the helicopter parent there to hold their hand.
Like a free play versus structure type thing? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, for me, if we're doing true confessions here again,
another
here's
one.
a second
Are we
one
playing
for
Truth
me.
or Dare? Is this something that's going on?
Just Alex.
I probably became more aware of all of this kind of stuff and probably more inundated or curious about it more from like the legal system side of things. And so I grew up like all of us did, but when I was a freshman in college, I one of my best friend growing up lived in my neighborhood, all that kind of stuff. Ended up finding himself in a murder kind of situation, and he's in prison now for the rest of his life. And I just kind of walked through that entire narrative of his trial and things like that. I testified at the trial. I was, one of the witnesses, and then
in the trial,
one of the witnesses, thank you.
I'm just clarifying that for you.
That's a true true crime fan right there.
Didn't want you to confess anything.
Yes, there's no confession happening here.
Yeah.
But then after he was sentenced and all those things, this TV show called Forensic Files, which there's an episode about what happened there. It's called Sordid Scheme, if you're actually curious about it. They contacted me and wanted to talk to me about what happened. And I watched it. I declined being a part of the show, but I watched it, and, they tell the whole narrative that day. And there were some comical parts to me as somebody that was an insider, because they put like the wrong picture for different people on there.
Oh, yeah.
That they were like, this is his girlfriend, and it was like totally someone different that was another mutual friend of ours, and all this kind of stuff. So there was like the part of me that's like, okay, how accurate are these things? And then they like this girl who had nothing to do with it, that wasn't a girlfriend, like her face is all of a sudden on here. So someone runs into her at Walmart, and they're like, oh, anyway. So at this point it's been, almost 30 years, which is just crazy 20 years. Sorry.
I was going to say, how old are you?
20 years?
Almost 20 years.
Yeah.
But I remember just the impact of that, because that had come out, the show, like right at like my 10-year high school reunion. And so nobody cared about me. Like everybody wanted to know about that. Like, how's this person doing? Oh, I watched a show. I watched all that. So then I kind of had this, I guess, piqued interest for like, how accurate are these? And then also like the legal system behind it, kind of seeing the inner workings of it. And so that kind of piqued a little bit more curiosity for me in that. But also this realization that, man, stereotypes and tropes of people that will find, like I never would have ever, if you would have put a lineup of 10 of my friends, that I knew that would find themselves in that situation, he would be like at the bottom of the list.
Yeah.
And so even to know like how deep evil can run in people, or how desperate people can get in terrible situations too, created this like awareness in that for me, and maybe an empathy. And then also for just the victim, of that crime. I've had a chance to talk to some family members and things like that since, and it's just tragic. So anyway, that kind of is what maybe drew for me I don't want to say passion, but just a desire or an interest in watching, more and more of that for probably a decade, which has probably since subsided. I'm not as excited about it, but that's my life.
Yeah. I also think that to what you're saying, people would be very empathetic and wanting to get information. And I do feel like true crime is a way, instead of like searching down a family member, or maybe, and I'm sure that there are some people that would like Facebook stalk them or like try to get information. I do feel like true crime is a way to get information and gather facts. And to your point, Alex, they're not always up to date, and there's even things that are outdated, especially if you look at older documentaries. Things have changed. But I think that there's this, I don't think everyone that is interested in true crime is loving like hearing about violence and is sinister, I do think that there's this care about what goes on in the world, and I think that it does, to some degree, wrap up some things with a bow, like when we're out of it. Like that sounds very like unemotional, but it's like I want to know the story from beginning to end, and I want to understand.
Yeah, I think it's like kind of a human thing where you want you want to know that there's justice sometimes, or if there's not, you knowing that violence and evil is in this world, and it's okay to like process that and not just to live in fear of it, but know that those things happen. And I don't think we're very desensitized to Hollywood violence, and that sort of thing, but we're not really impacted by real world violence that much. I would say most Americans are pretty sheltered to it compared to, years and years ago. So I think maybe it is partially morbid curiosity, but I do think there is something just human about that can be healthy to understand.
And we love stories. Like even, we on the podcast, I love to hear people's stories and their experiences. We're drawn to that. And I do feel like true crime in either a podcast or a documentary or listening to someone's story, like we are looking for the stories to be told in different ways. And I think that our culture loves that. We love to hear people's experiences.
And you hear that, I think, on a lot of family members, and on whatever kind of show it is. I think you hear that from a lot of family members that have agreed to be a part of these shows, is they feel like it's a way to honor, somebody, especially if it was a murder or something like that, a way to honor and put someone's story out there a little bit more and create an awareness about this. And I think in some ways, maybe there's a narrative that they want to be put on the person that was, the instigator in the crime, the person that did that crime. And so, so I think from that side of things as well, there's a healing that I think some people look for in participation in some of these true crime documentaries as well.
And I think it goes, people are going to react differently when they're the victims or the family of the victims. If I recall correctly, the Jeffrey Dahmer series that Netflix released, it was it's not a documentary, but it's a drama series. And there were, no, because it's not actually a documentary. It's like a drama, like a thriller or whatever, but it's based on the true story. But some of the family members of the victims were involved in it, and some like refused to be a part of it and thought it was a disgrace, that it was glorifying what he did. And so people are just gonna land on, even people involved in that are gonna land on different sides of this argument. And I think that's kind of just okay. You just have to be all right with that.
And they're making more of those too, where that had so much of a hype and a following that they're doing one on the Menendez brothers, and then they've already are planning like a season 3. And those to me are maybe a little more controversial, because you do hear about family members saying like, I wasn't consulted, or nobody talked to me, nobody reached out to me. And that to me is maybe more entertaining, like you're saying, than factual.
Yeah.
I think it was last week that Relevant magazine came out with an article, and I don't remember what the exact title of it was.
The case for not watching true crime documentaries.
Yeah, and so that's it. So obviously that's what it's doing. It's building a case for not watching it. And some of the things that article highlighted, which I thought were interesting and helpful to think through, are just the rise in them. And we talked about that, and just how they exploit, and we've talked about this a little bit, the psychological desire to understand evil. And I think all of us, we want to understand, like, how did a Jeffrey Dahmer get like that?
Yeah.
And then also we have this desire to protect ourselves. And so I think we think the more we understand evil or people that are predators, the more we'll be able to protect ourselves from some of that stuff. And it also talked about how it creates like a heightened sense of fear. Like it does, the more aware I think you are of evil and bad guys, and like as my kids become more aware of bad guys, like the more they're fearful of some of that kind of stuff. Like they'll watch a TV show, or they'll watch, even recently, one of my older kids watched Hook. You know, that
The
Yeah.
90s
the
movie?
90s movie.
Oh, I love that
Captain
movie.
Hook is scary in
And
that.
there's like a scene in there though where, and I totally forgot about this, where, you know, that in the middle of the night, you know, that's when Hook comes and steals the
Oh,
kids
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
out of the window. And that's freaky. Like,
Yeah.
you know, and so I just remembered, you know, the food fight of the fake food and all that kind of stuff, and always wishing I could have one of those. But then like something like that,
Yeah.
where you're just safely sleeping in your bedroom, and all of a sudden that, you know, you're little kids and you get taken away to Never Land, like that's frightening. And so it was highlighting some of like the potential downside of consuming this kind of media, and how it creates fear inside of us, and it eventually shapes our thoughts and perspectives. Undoubtedly, I think we know that the things we consume do shape us.
It's interesting. That I think that argument's really fascinating, because to me, it's like, I think certain people will consume this stuff and become more paranoid and believe that there's evil lurking around every corner, where other people probably, I think I would put myself in the category of I tend to feel safer when I understand it and watch it, because I'm like, oh, this is really how that stuff plays out. This is really the type of people that are involved in it. This is the type of people that are affected by it. And this, you know, and I enjoy that. But it's also that kind of thing of like, when you're laying in bed at night and you hear a sound or a crash or something, are you the type of person that's thinking, oh, that's probably a raccoon? Or are you the type of person that's like, you know, get a weapon, we got to defend the house, someone's trying to break in, you know? And does this type of content lead to that type of person that you are? Or is that, again, maybe just kind of a personality trait in how you interact with the world?
Definitely.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think we all read the relevant article about, you know, the case for not watching true crime. Did it work for anybody? Did it change your viewpoint on any of it, or are you kind of like, it's interesting, but it kind of just either reinforces or kind of keeps me in my perspective and opinion?
I think for me, I don't think that it necessarily changed my opinion of like, am I going to stop consuming like true crime in the ways that I do? No, but I do think that these conversations, and even like a challenging article, those are good things to read. I think even you're talking about like watching a documentary or even following a case, I think that's not solved yet also is something that can create a lot of fear. And so those things can make us write different decisions about how we live. I think the same thing, and the same awareness that we need to be of like, how is that kind of thing affecting me, is the same thing of, am I watching like all these comedy shows that are taking jabs at people's race and gender, and like, am I desensitized? I mean, we can all desensitize ourselves in many different ways. And I think what you have me thinking about, Eric, is just like, we need to be aware of what we're consuming and how that affects us. So like having that next thought of like, okay, I'm scared. Oh, I'm not thinking about a raccoon. I'm thinking about somebody getting into my house. Oh, like I'm making a joke and I just went too far because of what I'm consuming. Like what I'm consuming takes things too far. And so I think that we can really do that with a lot of different things. But I think awareness of what we're consuming and how it affects us needs to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the article does talk about, to your point about the Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy, those have both been some Netflix series, and it states that it understands, the article says, it's not outright glorifying their actions, but inevitably it turns them into larger than life figures. So when Hollywood, you know, casts attractive actors like Zac Efron or Evan Peters play these roles, it can start to blur the line between villain and anti-hero, and leading to misconceptions and even these real life criminal followings. And it does have the potential, it states, not to only disrespect the memory of the victims, but also fosters a distorted view of evil, because it creates these people as, in some way, a source of entertainment, and you know, casting them as like these Zac Efron, this beautiful High School Musical type of man, right, into this criminal. Like you can start to.
I just realized you had a crush on Zac Efron.
No, I'm just in general. I would say more beautiful man than probably the person they're playing.
Sorry, it was just.
Or there's even romanticizing of the guy of a current guy named Wade Wilson, who is someone that's in prison, and there's like these people that are just creating this fandom for how attractive this guy is and writing him all sorts of letters. And so creating this almost hero-like image for, I think, people to say, well, which I could see the argument being made that, hey, that's one way toward, infamy in some kind of way, that I could create this monster, this narrative, and my story continue to be told. And I've become, yes, I'm very bad. I'm a terrible human, and I could even accept that, and yet I'm putting myself on the map. My name is forever going to live in infamy, and so we create these types of dramas and excitement around these things, and it's asking, is that good?
Yeah. I think that to say something about that, I think true crime followers would also be would be disgusted by that. Like there are people that watch these things and follow these things, and I do think because of the followings of true crime, it makes it accessible for other people to do those types of things. But people that are really invested in true crime care about the story and are almost like purist of like what happened, what are the facts, how can we have have empathy and learn. And I'm like just speaking about that because I do think that there's a whole nother side of people that are, we were talking about like they're lining up to be his pen pal in jail. And those that would have followed the story and actually know the facts and details would be like, why would you do that? Yeah. Like, that's absolutely disgusting. Those tattoos are not pretty on your face. Like, do you know what those symbolize? And so I think there's also like a divide of maybe different levels of people that, and I guess I feel like I'm setting myself apart. I sound like
you're like, you're not a pen pal.
No, I'm
good.
not.
So that's good. That's a good thing.
Yeah,
to define.
I think that
it did seem like there's an era of people that were getting famous for being evil, and I think even news cycles now are trying to downplay. Let's not make their name famous. Yeah. And so people
like don't say his name.
One of the easiest ways to stardom, for some people was like just go do bad things, and because of like if it bleeds, it leads or whatever. Like
yeah.
Hey, that if I hurt people, right? And so like that's one way for me to, not in the best way, but a sure way inside of our culture to make your name famous, to make a name for yourself. And there's definitely people that have done that. And I think as a society, we've embraced and made that okay in a lot of ways. And I think there is a rejection starting to happen of some of that in media and things like that, of let's not make this person, their name famous. Let's focus more on the victims of some of these crimes rather than the perpetrator, which I think is a swing the right direction.
I agree.
For sure.
There's like a steering of the ship that's
well, I think we hinted at it with 24/7 news cycles that started happening in the early 80s and things like that. It made news entertainment. And now you've got things like CNN and Fox News where their whole business model is to entertain people with the news 24 hours a day and get them to watch ads. So then they're ad supported, and what they're doing is they're making entertainment out of news. And I think it's kind of always been going that way. And then, I mean, you wouldn't know about some of these cases if it wasn't for media. I mean, you might have, if 100 years ago, you probably would know more about something happening in the small town you lived in or wherever you were located. And you probably didn't get as much of the national news. But I don't know. It's even like you think of the term serial killer wasn't really, I think the FBI started using that term in the 70s. So it's a pretty new term, but it kind of came with this surge in fascination of what a serial killer is. And I mean, I've talked a lot about people's desire to control their worlds and control their environments. And I do think that's also a place where these come into play. Like, oh, well, if I watch this, I'm going to know how to combat that. Like I'm going to know what, even though that's probably not very helpful, but you might trick yourself into thinking I'm going to understand how to identify a serial killer because, and I'll be in control and they won't get me, So we write a bunch of narratives as to why we partake in it. And I mean, if I'm being honest, for me, sometimes it probably is just the raw entertainment value of it because it's kind of like a roller coaster. It's a little bit intriguing. It's a little bit scary. It's a little bit exciting. It can be interesting on a lot of different levels. But it's also, I'm just a super curious person. I'm not saying, I think most people are, but to different extents. And I want to consume that information and know about it. Let's talk a little bit about the biblical perspective on this. I mean, I don't know, Alex, maybe what's the chapter in the Bible that really speaks to true crime?
Yeah, I think the one, especially this article talks about, and we've talked about this before, and I do think it is a verse that we don't, that I probably don't think about as much as I should or don't give as much thought to, and I'm convinced that it's true, but it says in Philippians 4:8, whatever's true, whatever's noble, whatever's right, whatever's pure, whatever's excellent, anything that's praiseworthy, think about these things. And it's hard to put depravity, like the worst of our depravity, on that list, right? And so I think that's the case, especially the writer of this article would make, and a case that I would probably make, myself, is where does this fall into those parameters? And I would also say that we're talking about true crime on in a huge umbrella here. I think every show uniquely has its own niche. I think some really do try to have the shock and awe and really do focus on the depravity of humans. They're not really trying to honor victims. It's about, ratings and violence and the worse story you can tell, the more eyes are going to be on it.
Even like Netflix kind of manipulating it to be like cliffhanger and serialized, so you keep watching.
Yeah.
So like get to the end of it and they kind of introduce the cliffhanger and then you want to
play the next
keep going
episode.
And
so undoubtedly there are different buckets that I think true crime shows would fall into. And so I think just saying it's all bad is something I would hesitate to do from even a verse like that. Obviously, it's not necessarily addressing true crime, but it is addressing the things that we should think about, the things we should consume, what we should take into our hearts and our lives. So to me, I think it's more thinking about what are the wise, places, and how much time am I spending in those places, and just asking, some more of those questions, I think and maybe that's not a satisfactory answer, because I think a lot of times we get there is like wisdom, you have to just use wisdom, and it's difficult when that's entertaining, when that's fun, when it's a cycle in my life, when it's just numbing, all those things, like to actually have to think about what I think about is it's more of a challenge than often I think we like to admit.
Well, and you want to give some of that media the benefit of the doubt. I think I was thinking of America's Most Wanted, and John Walsh, the host of that, he created the show because of the tragedy he faced in his own life, where his firstborn son was murdered and the case was unsolved. And so I think that show would put stories in front of the public in hopes that they could help solve them.
Yeah.
And I mean, to me, I think, I don't know, I'd watch that even as a kid and think, oh, maybe I'll see that person and I'll be able to help. Or I remember even going to a Walmart and that bulletin board of all the missing people, and I'd stand there and just look at it and go, wow, I wonder if I've seen any of these faces. Because you do, I think there is a desire to do good and to help, and I think that, for being
some
honest
cases
about
have been
it,
solved.
Yeah, right. They have. They'd always have those follow-ups on that show that I enjoyed. But yeah, I think to your point, Alex, the other side of it, the dark side of it is, and then maybe even further to Jess's point that she was talking about earlier, is like, how is this molding us? How is it forming us? How is what we're consuming changing our perspective? Is it causing us to see the worst in our neighbor versus the best? Like, are we judging people based on this content that we're consuming? Are we, not, and then does that cause us to not think of, as it says, the things that are true and noble and right and pure.
And what am I justifying anything in the process? Or like, what am I overlooking? Or what do I know is something that is an issue for me that I am justifying because of this? Or, am I influencing somebody else in a negative way? I think that there's a lot to be aware of as we're thinking about this.
And we do a lot of justification for whatever we want, I mean, whether it's, we convince ourselves that, okay, even though I eat like crap, I'm not going to feel like crap. Or we convince ourselves, at the end of the day, I think you watch the news all the time, you are going to be more anxious. You put in something that is driven to motivate fear and anxiety, you are going to live a more anxious life. You watch something that, desensitizes, devalues humans. I think the propensity is that you are going to have a little less of a ability to see the image of God in people. And so I think we have to just keep those things in mind as we whatever kind of stuff we're taking in, whether it's physical food or things into our mind. We only have so much time in a day. And so I don't want to break again like I did a few weeks ago. We only have so much time each day. And so how much and what are we consuming is something I think we talk about often on here. We just have to give a lot more thought than often we do. And I think for me, it's just good to sometimes have an article like that be a reminder, because I know, I know I shouldn't eat that, but I want it. I crave it. I desire it. And so sometimes, I need my wife to be like, really? The fourth cookie? And not in a shaming way, but like, okay.
See, Netflix heard you, and they've started, a lot of their docuseries are cutting down on episodes. They're like
There's only
4 episodes at most. So you're not binging 12 episodes.
True.
So
which, I mean, even that is
condensed, not diluted.
Yeah.
It's true. It is true. I think that other side of it, of that argument, even if we're going to take it to the health argument or diet or food that we eat, it's moderation. And I think that's something that we can all do better at. Like,
right?
Hey, if this is something God probably wired you a certain way to have those curiosities, to have, that interest in that. And then, but like, find the good in that, find the reason why. And, watching a few of those shows or whatever maybe you can enjoy that for whatever reason. But I think, moderation. If that's your whole life, if you're becoming paranoid, if you're becoming obsessed, if you believe it leads you to believe every little conspiracy theory or story you see online, and you start to try to pin crimes on your neighbors or something like that, I think it can be a problem.
And I think maybe the more difficult part about that is your self-awareness is probably not going to be there. So you're going to actually have to be bold and willing enough to like actually ask somebody else. And most people that I know that are really into conspiracy theories, for example, the self-awareness is not there.
Yeah.
And most of the things that I am doing or partaking in that are not wise or not actually building up my life, like that's why I'm doing it, because I'm not self-aware enough to make the changes. And so sometimes it makes asking other people, hey, do you think I'm living on edge? Do you think that this is affecting me? Like just asking people that know maybe your consumption habits or whatever it is. How do you think this is shaping? What have you noticed? And I think, having friends and relationships like that are really critical towards our development and discipleship. And I think a part of the way of Jesus is having those confessional communities where you can have. But that is a scary question.
Okay, I heard a quote this last week that said, and I think parenting this made me think of this, where the quote was, "You're raising your kids for 25% of their life, and this other 75% of their life, you're raising an adult." And so like me being like 40, it's like it's been a long time since I've had someone quote unquote parenting me or governing me or keeping me accountable in that way. And so like, it's like when I feel like a good time of this is like when you go to college or like when you're out of high school, it's like now everything's okay and you can do whatever you want. You can eat whatever you want. You can watch whatever you want. Like it's kind of up to you. And so I think a good question is, how are we paying attention to what we're consuming, to what we're doing? Because we don't have that necessary, like someone always like looking over our shoulder or parenting us. So it's like, okay, it is a good reminder to, am I walking with the Lord? Like, who is in my circle? Who is keeping me accountable? Like, what are my goals? Like, those are important things to at least be thinking about of like, I want to eat healthier. I want to consume this. I want to have moderation. And I feel like that whole, like, even that quote, like, made me think, like, it's been a while since, like, I've kind of just checked myself of, like, my life of, because we can justify so much because we're adults. We can do whatever we want. We can go whatever we want. We have our own bank accounts. Like, we have our own, we can govern ourselves, right? We can be autonomous, but we choose to, as believers, to say, okay, I can't do this on my own. Right. Like, I need you, Jesus, to give me wisdom, and I need the Holy Spirit to guide me and to give that, what's the word? When you... Discernment, but it's like that feeling like you shouldn't do something.
Conviction.
Yes,
Yeah,
I need that conviction. Like, I need people that are saying, like, hey, you're better than that. Like, and so I think, like, it's a good opportunity for all that. When we can, we're in a world where we can do whatever we want, essentially.
Yeah. Well, I think you bring up parenting, and that's kind of an interesting side of it too, because I mean, I identified at a pretty young age in myself that morbid curiosity where I was just like, what's this about? I need to know about that. I want to know more. I saw something on TV or in a magazine, and I need to like investigate that. And I start to see that now in my own kids or in my son specifically, where he's very drawn to like the true crime stuff, and I see myself in that, and I'm like, how do I help him, manage that and talk about that and like say, hey, let's, if this is something you're curious in, like where can we explore it together in a safe place, in a safe area, and like, and also what are the limits? And I think that's really, really tough. I mean, especially where you can kind of draw the lines, but as a child, they have unlimited resources to circumvent your boundaries, so it's tricky. I remember, I think I might've mentioned this on the podcast before, so forgive me if that's the case, but I remember my son coming across a video of a owner putting their dog to sleep, and it was just, and my son was so upset by that, and it's just, it's one of those real world encounters where it was probably, I don't even know if it was a year later that we found ourselves in that situation where we were telling the kids that we had to put the dog down, and it's like it's this weird moment where you're all in the kitchen around that pet, and you're sobbing, and your kids don't know what to do, and you don't know what to do, and it's like you feel horrible because you're the parent and you're the one that's got to go and commit, like feel like you're committing this act on to a child, feels like a family member. But it's like, in some ways, I'm like, man, out of that circumstance early on that had already happened, we'd already started to have those conversations about life and death and what that means, and that's a real world thing, and it's so tough. And as humans, we want to sometimes just shield ourselves from any type of hurt or any pain, and it's like you don't know light without dark. You don't know joy without sadness. You don't know, so sometimes when we can manage it and we can and welcome it in, and we can have those tough conversations, it's probably okay. It's not good to go the other extreme either, where we just completely plug our ears and bury our heads in the sand to what humanity is and what it looks like in a fallen world.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Do we have anything else in the tank today? Anybody else? I feel like we've kind of squeezed the juice from the citrus, the lime, the lemon.
Anybody ever wants to talk about true crime, hit me up.
If you want to start another separate podcast with Jess.
We'll listen to her other podcast.
Jarrett and I can start our podcast.
I mean, it's interesting too, because I think Serial was one of the first, true crime podcasts to really blow up. And that kind of put podcasting on a different level where more and more people started listening to podcasts. And it is, I don't know, it's fascinating how that stuff works.
And there's a fascination with people doing things we couldn't imagine.
Yeah.
Because most of us could never relate or think up the stories that are actually true. Like, it's not a script that was written in Hollywood. It's a true story. And I think that there is a fascination with why do people do the things they do. There is definitely a psychological side. And then I don't know, Alex, what you would say to this, but like, as we're talking, I'm thinking, I'm not trying to like pigeonhole you as like, okay, give me all the answers, but there is a lot of violence in the Bible. Like, my kids will like come and read that, like, oh, someone, I mean, and so it's like we're interacting with violence and things happening in lots of different ways. And so I think, Eric, to your point, I think it's having those conversations. Like, when somebody reads something, or maybe even brings us something, our kids bring us something from the Bible, or we read about that, it's like, okay, what's the context of that? Like, why was it happening? Like, what's the message in that? And let's have a deeper understanding versus like just being encapsulated or like in awe that some like this violent thing happened. Like, what's the story around it? Like, what's the historical context? Maybe I answered it myself, but I just think that there's also like, it's not like the Bible is all sunshine and rainbows. Like, there's a massively terrible crucifixion that happened right smack dab in the middle almost. And so I think that there is this part of us where it's like, we can't avoid it, but how, like, having conversations about it. Thoughts?
Yeah, undoubtedly scripture does do that. I would say that there's, some of those narratives, I think the more you see some of those things go from like 2D to 3D in your life, like, I think kind of that example you were talking about, Eric, your son seeing a dog owner having to, put their pet down, like, that was scary. But then introducing it into like 3D in your actual life, sometimes it, or actually like, oh, somebody got shot, like kids run around, playing, cops and robbers all the time. Yeah. They got their little, their little guns and, see something shot, but like then actually seeing what a real gun would do to, a person, like sometimes that movement from like, okay, I understand this figuratively and imaginatively to like actually seeing it, like there's no going back sometimes in like the heart of a kid. And so then once you actually introduce like the visuals of some of this, like that, some of these shows and things like that introduce, I think that's where it starts to, I mean, even to the point of, I think a lot of Christians, the thing that really, the Passion of the Christ drew out in a lot of people was like, I get this conceptually, but holy cow, that might have been what it was like this emotional pull into the actuality of that. There's just a difference when it goes from 2D in our heads and cartoonish to like, oh wow. Yeah, well, so I think that's when kind of the thing to protect.
Engages all our senses.
Yeah, I think even recently in one of in the past sermon series we've been in Hearing God's Voice, I think Minister Mark had mentioned, knowing when you're hearing something from God and when you're hearing something from the enemy, and I think that can apply to this too, because I think when you if this is causing you to have thoughts of violence or to hurt animals or to hurt people or to hurt yourself or to seek out that sort of thing, like, wow, red flag, alert, like, be honest with that, talk to somebody about that.
Yeah, if it's stimulating.
That's true too, besides from an entertainment standpoint, right? So I think be aware of those things, and like Alex said, and invite people into your lives to have those conversations. And well, we could go on and on and on and talk more about our true crime, but
I got to get my fried rice.
Yeah, Alex is hungry. He's getting hangry. if you have any questions or concerns, or you want to share your favorite true crime series with Jess so she can add it to her list, you can email us at podcast@cccomaha.org, or you can reach out to us on social media at Instagram or TikTok at CCCOMA Podcast, or leave us a voicemail. Call us at 402-885-9930. And until next time, we'll talk to you then.